All right, g'day everybody. Welcome to Bourbon Brothers. We're looking at our November bourbons, and I'm just so thrilled to introduce Will Schragis from Barrell, who's going to join us today. So instead of just me talking at you like I usually do for these tasting calls, we're very lucky occasionally to get somebody from the distillery to come talk to us and talk about their brilliant bourbons. And Barrell's absolutely one of my favorite distilleries out there. They do innovative and really cool things. So with that, let me introduce Will Schragis. Thanks for joining us today, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. And I know this is a long time coming. And so I'm really excited to talk to you and talk to everyone, answer whatever questions you might have, talk about this amazing single barrel that we got down there. As the person who looks after sort of logistics for our company, there's other people who do a lot of work on it, but the buck kind of stops at me. Getting a single barrel to Australia from America there's so many steps in it, from the selection process, but then also just the like shrink wrapped, palletized, unique thing that has to touch so many different places and be registered in so many different places. And I'm just so glad it got there. And it's like, it feels even more special to me in Australia than it would in another place because of like, we got the
effort that it takes. And having been on the receiving end of these types of things, it is an absolute nightmare to get them here. So the effort that you guys have put in to do that and to expose Barrell to that Australian market, bourbon in Australia is huge, and it's growing and it's growing and it's growing. We get everybody who's actually learning there's so much more than, RTDs, the pre-mix cans, of Jack or Jim or anything out there. And all of a sudden it's just growing and there's an excitement around it. And for Barrell to be invested and to work with the awesome people at Orrsum and Whiskey Hunt to bring some of your product out. And we're starting to see it on the shelves in some stores, and that's kind of exciting as well out there. But Will, you Chief Innovation Officer, is that the title?
Yeah, so I was the first employee of Barrell Spirits in 2016, although I started working with Joe Beatrice, the owner and founder, in 2015. And Joe is such an amazing person to work with and for. And like, I still every day I'm like sort of learning from his perspective on things. And he hired me and he was like, I'm hiring you to help me make decisions like what should your title be if you need to be taken seriously at a distributor. And so for 5.5, 6 years, I was the national director. And the company grew and grew and grew. And that was a wonderfully vague title because national director could be sort of anything.
Anything, yeah.
And, we hit this moment where like, we're still a pretty small, we're 50, 60 people total. And that's like bottling, HR, all of the sales team, compliance, administrative, social media, graphic design, everything, 50, 60 people total. And we had this moment where we had to actually start organizing things where we had the manager level, the director level. And so we had to put this chief level in. And so there's, Joe is the founder and the owner. He doesn't have there's Allison, who's our chief marketing officer. There's Katie, who's like chief design. And so Joe, in this like strange revisit to one of our first conversations, was like, well, you look after sales, so we could make you chief sales officer. And I said, that's true, but like a lot of the work I do is on the conceptual design of products and strategy. And so I actually have two titles: chief sales officer, which is when I'm, in the business room, people take me seriously.
Right.
And then chief product innovation officer, which is like really where my passion lies, which is working with Joe on the strategy of designing new whiskeys.
Doing the cool stuff.
And it's really cool for me too, to be able to sit at both tables of the fun creative table and then the professionally really gratifying, like, dollars in, dollars out table at the same time.
And so how did you get into whiskey, man? What was your starting point for exploring this world?
Oh, wow. It's funny because I feel like I have such imposter syndrome in the industry. I still feel very young, but at this point, it's like, it's this strange sequence of events that was very random and being in the right place at the right time. But in hindsight, it seems very linear now. Growing up and through college, I was always just someone who was like interested in the food industry. There were moments that I thought I wanted to be a restaurateur. There were moments that I like loved cooking or like loved visiting cheese makers growing up. I had like I was like the little 12-year-old fancy boy who like wanted to go to the cheese shop.
Yeah.
And in college, as a sort of joke, my like new best friend freshman year, we had just met, and I joined the homebrewing club. And we took it seriously because we were like wide-eyed freshmen. And we get there and it's just like a bunch of seniors drinking, and they just like throw us the recipe and tell us to do it. And so we went every week and we took it more seriously than anyone else had done it, and so the two of us made beer every week for a year. And so they named us the presidents the next year. And so as a sophomore, which I technically was underage in college, but I was the president of the homebrewing club. And the other sort of extracurricular activity that I was doing in university was helping book and promote and produce concerts. And so I was doing a lot of work applying for funding from the university to help subsidize things. And my best friend and I figured out that if we took attendance at the brewing club, it was a 6-hour-a-week club on Saturday mornings. We were actually one of the most person hours heavy clubs in the school. We had like 30, 40 people coming for 6 hours a week. And so we applied for a ton of funding, and the school said yes. And so suddenly we had a completely university funded homebrewing club, but we had to use the money. So I just spent 3 years of university basically overseeing 6 different homebrews a week.
Wow.
And the summer before I graduated, so the summer between my 3rd and 4th year, on a whim, I sent letters to all of the micro distilleries in New York City where I grew up saying, I do all this brewing. I'm really interested in the food and the alcohol thing, potentially as a career. It was right when sort of the micro brewery or micro distillery and like craft distillery boom started in America. Can I come and intern for the summer? And a couple of people told me I could like work, bottling line or whatever. But Kings County Distillery in New York called me immediately and said, how are you with computers? And I said, like, for a computer person, bad, but for a normal person, good, because I'm a person who went through an education with computers. And they said, if you will digitize all of our handwritten yield and time logs from us growing, then you can be the distilling intern for the year. So I was at that point 21.
Cool.
I got trained legally in a way that I could put on a resume as a distiller.
Yep.
In a place that everything was done by hand. And so,
yep.
Though the distillation is far more rudimentary at a place like Kings County, still tasting everything off the still, smelling, like when something burns, you notice because you smell it, not because light goes on. And that was an amazing. I just fell in love with the whiskey industry at that moment, but I didn't know I wanted to do it yet. I ended up, after university, going to the Culinary Institute of America and studying wine, and then started working as a sommelier.
Yep.
I fell in love with that side. And then my first job out of restaurants was with an auction house, and I was selling wine for them. And they had a director of spirits position open. And I just wanted the promotion. So I just applied for it and I got it. And like suddenly knowing about whiskey from having made it became really important, because that was still like right as the Pappy craze was going on. It was right when like Macallan 18 went from $150 to $500. Like that type of stuff was going on when Japanese whiskey first started getting popular. And it was at that shop and auction house that I met Joe when he launched Barrell Spirits, and he was a one-man mission. We were the second store to ever bring in Barrell. And he, right when we met and we like had lunch, because we got along and he wanted to ask questions about the New York market and stuff. And he said, I just want you to know you're going to work for me one day. And I kind of shrugged it off. I had to stay at that job for a while. I then went and worked for Rum Clement and Rum Demoiselle and Sherman's Reserve, that what's now called Spirit Bomb.
Yeah.
And Joe got back in touch with me and said, I'm in 6 states. I want to be in 50 states. What's a good title? And so that is how I wound up here. And that was 7 years ago now. And it's been a crazy ride.
That's insane.
Yeah, I feel just so lucky that I was doing work that people felt was good in the right place to get noticed, and then, happened to get picked up, if you will, by someone who is so dedicated to their own vision like Joe and willing to invest in it. And all the pieces we've added now, we're in 48 states and 7 countries or whatever it is. And I get to come on interviews in Australia and talk about single barrels.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if there was a lot of luck in it, Will. It sounds like the harder you work, the luckier you got with your career path there. So Barrell's going into its 10th year next year, right? They're 2013 within there. So can you talk a little bit about Barrell's starting point, about how they came to be and the sort of unique journey that Barrell's undertaken?
Yeah, so Joe was not in the alcohol industry specifically before Barrell Craft Spirits, but he worked and owned, I guess you'd call it a marketing company, but it really was like a digital and modern communication solutions firm. It's called Blue Dingo, and they worked with alcohol companies, but they worked with all sorts of different industries.
It's kind of funny that they're using dingo as an Australian animal.
Yeah.
In there, we're talking about this in Australia
now. And their forte was helping modernize communication and marketing for people. So they did a lot of like building websites and building internet and digital activations. And a lot of Joe's favorite clients were alcohol companies. So he worked really closely with Jose Cuervo, worked really closely with Castle Brands, that's now part of Pernod Ricard, and made all these connections, especially in Kentucky, because Kentucky's sort of the hub of bulk spirits in America. It's not just the hub of bourbon production. And when he sort of had this like epiphany in 2012, 2013 of the bourbon industry is too brand focused and not discovery focused or innovation focused enough. And he had this idea of I'm going to start a brand that is transparent about not being its own distillery, but is going to give a high quality cask strength offering that is always going to be the new thing on the shelf.
Right.
The transparent, consistency is not as important as quality, and that there's identity in being something new to try. And so the beginning of Barrell Craft Spirits was Barrell Bourbon Batch 1 and then Barrell Bourbon Batch 2, which was nothing like it, because they were different bourbons to try.
Right.
And originally the idea was you make bourbon Batch 1 and whatever size it is to make the best blend you can. When it's gone, you release Batch 2 and you have one at a time. And right after I started, which was in beginning of 2016 or end of 2015, we had this moment where we had batches 5 and 6 that were the same set of barrels, but one of them had spent 6 years on the top of the rickhouse and one of them had spent 6 years on the bottom of the rickhouse. And they were so drastically different. And we realized after batch 5 that the much more interesting situation would be to have batch 6 at the same time so people could try both.
Right.
And that was this, we didn't realize it then, but in hindsight, really amazing turning point of this is not a one at a time company. This is a portfolio of spirits. But it started just with that, let's overlap 5 and 6 so people can try the difference. And so since then, as we've added more and more projects on, we have changed the vision of the company to be a blending house of spirits. And now we have arguably the most vast portfolio of any independently owned whiskey company in the world. And we have certain blends like Dovetail, Armida, Seagrass, Vantage, which is new, that are always the same concept, but we're still very true to cask strength and blending to be the best thing we can make at that moment. So proofs actually change on a lot of our releases because we're always blending to taste, not to proof.
Yeah. So how do you go about sourcing the whiskies that you're bringing in? what is that process?
So there's many different ways of acquiring barrels or even dumped barrels that are in a stainless steel drum or polytote or something. And every interaction we have is a little bit different. We work at this point with, I think it's 68 distilleries now around the world. And we work directly with distilleries. We work with brokers who work with distilleries. We work with brokers who work with other brokers. Certain things we own and sit on for long periods of time as they age. Certain things we become available to us and they're the way we want them right then. We buy 1 barrel sometimes. We buy 1,000 barrels sometimes. And so there's no exact way of working with people, but what Joe was able to create a reputation around, which has served us exceedingly well in the past 4 or 5 years, is we pay on time. We're easy to work with. We're not concerned if there's other identical barrels behind it or not. We respect whether someone wants us to talk about who they are or they want us to keep it secret. We are very focused on acquiring barrels or distillate, and immediately, like, the book is closed on the life of that barrel before it became ours, and then we analyze how we're going to use it. And it is ours. And because of that, we're a lot of people's first call now. Whether it's a small brand that both distills and sources for their brand, and they need to raise money for something, and so they need a release valve for selling something off. Whether it's a broker who has access to something really exciting, but it's a one-time buy, and so no one would want to build a new product beyond it. Or whether it's something really special, and you offer your special things to your best customers. And we've been a customer that has grown 100% for 7 years in a row, and our checks don't bounce. And when someone calls us, we pick up the phone, and because of that, our stocks and also our access is really unique.
That's awesome. So when you talk about analyzing it, when you get that barrel in, what's that process for you?
So again, like sourcing, every time is a little bit different, because if you're talking to someone about barrels that were an experimental mash bill at a distillery that is otherwise very well known, you want to try one. But if you're talking about 36 barrels, you might try all 36. Talking about 200 barrels, you're not going to try all 200. And so there's questions about, like, were these aged next to each other? Are they palletized in the orders that they were aged in, or is it random? And so you kind of have to make a decision about how much you're going to. And so a lot of times what we'll do is we'll spot check by pallet, 1 per pallet. So it's 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 6, depending on the pallet size. And if we get to 8 or 10 or 12 or 16 of those, and they're all very similar, the proofs are similar to it, then we can conclude that at that point it's a safe enough to not worry about everything, because there's a lot of cost and work that goes into not only tasting and analyzing it, but also getting those, like, someone has to go and pull them and pull it out of bond legally. Like, there's all of this stuff that goes. It's not just about what is going to taste good at that moment. It's also about, does this taste like something that will taste good in 2 years? Do we have an idea of what we want to do with it? Do we know where it's coming from and what happens to it in the place that we're going to put it? And like all of those decisions also change based on how much you think you're going to need in different situations. So there's a really romantic side of it, which is like, this is awesome, let's use it. And then there's a little bit of a planning side of it as well. And there's also a trust side of, do we know where these are coming from? Do we know what the yields are going to be like? And you learn your lessons each time. Like, things happen that are better than you'd expect, and things happen that are not what you'd expect. And you learn not who to trust as in people are trying to pull one over on you, but what information you can take to the bank and what you can't. And what has been really interesting work in the past 2 or 3 years as our company has grown so much is being able to identify what the goal, the purpose of the things you're looking at from a sourcing. And then also we do so much rebarreling and secondary maturation and finishing now. Having an idea of what you're shooting for allows you to make decisions that are a little bit different than, do I like this or not?
Right.
And so being 6 months or 1 year or 2 years out on all of that planning allows you to be a lot more productive in decisions about what to source, where to put it, how far away to put it, how to store it. Do you want to store it in a way that's going to be easy to move quickly, or do you want to store it in a way that's going to age it differently? Because barrels on their side get more surface area to volume, but there's a lot of labor that goes into getting them out again. So if it's going to be 6, you might leave them on the pallets. If not, you put them on their side. And that's the evolution of our operations has changed so much in that type of decision making too, which is really cool.
Very cool. So let's move on to this single barrel program that you do run. So that was sort of the genesis where Barrell started. You've obviously moved into your Seagrass and Dovetailers programs there, but sort of explain how people get involved with single barrel programs with you.
Yes.
And then we sort of touch on Orrsum and Whiskey Hunt with this particular bottle.
So in America, the sort of fastest growing part of the bourbon industry is the single barrel side. And I imagine that's somewhat true in Australia, although single barrels, and especially single barrels at cask strength, are extremely complicated to get to Australia. So it's probably a slower burn there. So what makes this, I think, so special, I imagine this is one of not that many cask strength single barrels that
you'd be absolutely accurate in that assumption, mate. It's incredibly challenging, and that's why it's so exciting to get our hands on it.
Yeah. And so we are in our heart and like identity a blending house. And so single barrels to us are only barrels that are in balance in a way where they are better on their own than they would be as an ingredient in something else.
Right.
And so the way that we identify them is there's sort of two different moments. There's when we are bringing barrels in either for a blend or to taste them. Sometimes they're just singing. And at that point, we take the whole lot of barrels and we taste through them and we pick our favorites and they go into the single barrel program.
Yep.
The second, and that's actually where this one, Z2 or Z2 D2 came from. It was identified like a year before we ended up bottling it as this is a very, very high quality set of barrels and they are really in balance. And if we blend them, it'll be good, but it won't show the differences well enough.
Yeah.
The second side that happens is sometimes when we are dumping for a blend, anyone in production can kind of say like, hold the phone when a bung gets pulled. It's like that smell. It's almost always by smell first, and then you sort of taste it.
Right.
And so things get sort of brought back into the program too after that. But what is important is things get identified, and then before they're bottled, they get checked as like, is this still a really good whiskey? And they get identified at different moments because any time that we are analyzing barrels, we want to give the opportunity to whomever in the company is doing that to flag the ones that are really good as single barrels. So our single barrels are not just random barrels from us. They are barrels that have been sort of pulled out of whatever program they were supposed to be in to go into the single barrel program. And because of that, though we do more and more every year, our single barrels are actually pretty limited.
Right.
Because we're limited by stock of barrels that we feel fit the bill correctly, not to mention the sort of production time and energy that goes into every one being unique and at a different proof, which means it's a different label design and a different short run of labels and a different bottling. There's like everything. The label on the case is like every label for us is not just one label. It's front, back label, case label, like and so because of that, I think this is one of maybe 2 or 3 single barrels and private releases that have ever gotten into Australia.
Yep.
Might be the first single barrel bourbon. And there's a lot of states and a lot of markets that get 1 or 2 or 3 a year in America too.
That's brilliant. And because we, as always, we're very grateful to our friends up at Orrsum Spirits and Whiskey Hunt who have helped us bring this out to our subscribers who are going to be, you're going to have, a couple of hundred people enjoying this and trying it and get to know maybe Barrell for the first time, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah.
Of people who are passionate. Now, before we touch on the bourbon, we taste and have a look at it. Barrell has a really high focus on giving back to communities, and one of the features of this particular barrel is the opportunity to contribute to TipJar, which was supporting the hospitality industry. They had such a rough time through our lockdowns and COVID and that, but Barrell does have a really good history and focus on giving back through the various work that they do. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so TipJar was really interesting because I don't want to take credit for TipJar, and TipJar was, you guys and Orrsum sort of coming to us and saying, we know that you are a company that cares about doing the right thing, and this is a situation that's going on, and it's really important to us to have the reputation and to be known as someone who is willing to be there on the right side of things when someone brings us a situation like that. Mm-hmm. What has been really eye-opening to me, even though I've had a lot of good bosses in my career, so I don't want to say that Joe is better than other ones in any major way, because there's been so many people who have been so kind to me. But another thing I've always really learned from Joe is you can't be a good manager of people or a company unless you actually really care about the well-being of the people at the company. And so Barrell, when we launched Seagrass, for instance, which is our top selling item, we picked the name Seagrass because it looks right on the bottle and people think of seagrass as the grass on the beach, even though it's actually on the bottle. It spoke to the imagery and concept of that whiskey. We didn't know anything about how problematic the destruction of seagrass beds in the world, and especially on the coast of America, is right now. And so we learned that, and then it was like, well, if we're going to benefit off of this word existing, we need to be also involved in one way or another. And Janet, who's our chief administrative officer, who's married to Joe, it's Janet Beatrice. Mm-hmm. She did a lot of research about what are the best ways that we can be involved in this, and we ended up partnering with the Ocean Foundation, who is replanting seagrass beds around.
Right.
And what has been so cool for me and the rest of the sales team to see is seagrass is a bigger project than we ever expected it to be. And because of that, our interaction with the Ocean Foundation is so much bigger than we ever expected to be, because we were donating per bottle produced, if you will. And the sales were there, and so the bottles were there. But helping with people in the industry with COVID, I think that there's this really sad reality of you don't know where the lacks of safety nets are necessarily until the fall happens. And I'm not particularly familiar with the Australian system, mm-hmm. but I know from colleagues of mine and former colleagues of mine in New York, the hospitality industry not only got crushed in terms of jobs disappearing, but they're the types of jobs that people aren't really eligible for support in certain ways. And when all of the different bailout things happened, it just didn't reach the hospitality industry the way that it should have. And when you're an alcohol producer, you live and die by the hospitality industry having your back. And so it's been a really humbling 3 years, basically, of I and Barrell and Joe and Janet and everyone who works for Barrell just wanting to help when we can.
Yeah.
And so it's such an easy yes for us,
Yeah. No, it's brilliant. And there is actually a section on Barrell's website about giving back if any wants to go and have a look on it in there, and we'll make sure to include that in there. So onto the fun part. Let's talk about the Z2D2 or Z2D2. So this is the barrel pick that we're featuring there. So it's a cask strength, so coming in at 57.65% to 5-year-old, 206 bottle yield for this particular one. So let me just get mine here. So any particular insight that you want to offer up on this particular barrel and how it got here?
So this was only one of maybe like 20 or 25 barrels in this particular lot that almost all of them ended up in the single barrel program because they were just this like perfect fruit, corn, oak, alcohol, all so loud, but like not messing with each other moment.
Yeah.
It was just an amazing set of barrels. And unfortunately, it was one of those situations where they came from a very famous distillery that I absolutely cannot say out loud. And there were only a few of them available. And it's because they changed hand once years before. So they were aged in a different place and they were like sort of off profile.
Right.
And we got the call about them and it was an easy yes. And then it was just like a sad, we wish it could, it was 40. And if it was 4,000, it would have been a yes too, because they were so good.
Right.
And so they were a pretty obvious use in this single barrel program. What's really fascinating about bourbon production in contrast to any other whiskey, I guess, except for American rye, but bourbon and rye production is the canon you have to, and the like rules you have to work in to produce bourbon are so strict.
Incredibly.
And people in large bourbon producers use the rule about never before use charred American oak or charred barrel. It doesn't have to be American oak legally, though it usually is. As a like, this is a quality control situation, but it also really handcuffs you in terms of what you're able to do and like from a creativity standpoint and making things more exciting. And so there's a lot of, when you find barrels that are really special, they just kind of happened. It's not necessarily something you did. And oak, like as it gets older, like it continues to extract out of the barrel, and there's a lot of really good distillate that gets ruined by being over oaked. So in bourbon, unfortunately, anything that age is how long it was in the barrel, it's very, very difficult to have un-oaky old bourbon, if you will.
Correct.
So the sweet spot of when all of the things feel very mature, but it's not one-dimensional from the oak. And barrels hit it at different points, starting when they're 2, but it's usually 4 or 5, and then sort of up until however old they get. But when you talk to more and more bourbon drinkers, very few people who are really in the bourbon world like bourbon that's older than 12 or 15 years.
Yep.
And a lot of the best bourbon is like 5 to 8, but it's 5 to 8 that matured really early on. And so all of the ethyl acetate is sort of oxidized out. And this barrel specifically, I think, has this moment where there's these like fruit esters from distillation that are still there, but all of the things that seem harsh about young whiskey are gone. And so it's like hanging on by a thread of youth. And it just like, it tastes like something that it is both older and younger at the same time, which I think is really cool.
Very cool. So we typically do our own tasting notes, but for when we bring these barrels in, I respect the notes that came from Orrsum with it here. So they've got it as, on that nose, this brown sugar, some cola, pecan, the Tootsie Roll, and some cinnamon bread pudding. So I can definitely pick up that brown sugar and cola within there, and also that sort of cinnamon background on that nose as well. So it is a really, really enjoyable nose on this, and it's almost my favorite part of it.
Yeah, the cola is really cool to me because, like, Coca-Cola is a very acidic thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get bourbons that have a cola note, part of it is like there's a brightness to that. That same note is dull when it becomes more of a like cocoa nib type of situation. It's like the same flavor, but when it's cola, it means it's like still bright. It almost smells fruity or acidic. And that, to me, that's what really marked these barrels, is really special to us.
And then on that palate, mate, I get that cinnamon just sort of flowing through from the nose. That's sort of the predominant palate that comes through for me. Some of the pecans and bit of cinnamon apple in there as well, which is that sort of fruity in there. But that cinnamon it's reasonably unique to this one. It's probably higher cinnamon that I've experienced with many on there, which is good. I love bloody cinnamon, so that works well.
Yeah, again, and cinnamon comes from barrel, but it also comes from oxidation of distillate molecules, and so and their interactions with barrels, and so that's something that in more youth you can really identify, and it becomes a little bit more refined in much older whiskey.
Excellent, and that finish, it's a reasonably dry finish for the bourbon there, and you do get a little bit of that oak sort of finally coming through on that sort of long finish on it as well.
Yeah.
I love this. I've put aside a couple for my own stash, and one of them's already disappeared.
Behind you. Is that a box of gold label bourbon behind you as well?
Yeah, it's a couple of the gold labels there.
Very cool.
Yeah, they're a fun pick. So out of here. All right. So look, it's an incredible pick. I know that our members are going to absolutely love it. We've got a few bottles for the 4-bottle upgrade for our subscribers there as well, if anybody's interested in that. Now, do you guys do bourbon tourism? Do you have visitors at the distillery?
So we are not open to the public. Part of that is our facility. We control our own facility completely, but we're still an independent company. And so it's a working factory, and all of the insurance and work that goes into hosting is, and also everyone in our company has jobs. We don't have a hospitality person, and so there's someone doing their job. We are opening a new facility next year, and though it won't be open to the public, it will be a little bit easier to show people through. Yep. So the short answer is no. But it doesn't mean it's not worth asking. And so through Orrsum, and it's worth getting in touch if you want to visit, as long as everyone is okay with the answer being, I'm sorry, we don't have time to take a visitor right now. Because every once in a while, we have, someone's sibling who works for the company is coming in that day anyway. So someone's already taking an hour off to show them around, and we can sort of
piggyback.
Yeah. So we as much as I would love to, there's a lot of investment that goes into the tourism side of it, and you can't just dip your toe in it. You either have to do it or not.
You have to go all in. Yeah, absolutely, to make sure it's a good experience and representative of what Barrell is.
Yeah, a good, safe, available, consistent experience, and we are so nose to the grindstone on making sure that the whiskey is at the standard that we have set for it all the time, that we just don't really have the capacity as a company to worry about the glitch side of it. We want to make the best whiskey we can all the time.
Yeah,
no matter what.
That makes absolute sense. Look, I'm a massive fan of what you guys are doing. It's kind of disrupting the traditional bourbon areas, and you're producing just some of my favorite bourbons and blends that I've had in the last few years. There was another awesome pick, a Bumblebee pick that was a blinder, an absolute blinder, and that one did not last nearly long enough.
I forgot about that.
So, yeah, no, that was an absolute belter as well. All right, so Fisher, what's next for Barrell? Is there anything cool you can sort of tell us that's coming down the road that's not protected at the moment, mate?
So I don't think that Vantage has reached Australia yet.
No.
Vantage is our newest, what we call evergreen release. So it's in the line with Seagrass and Dovetail.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a blend of straight bourbons. The secondary maturation is all virgin oak on it. So it is a bourbon, but it is a blend of Mizunara finish, toasted American oak finish, and French oak finish. Here, I have a bottle right here. Looks like that.
That's fine.
And it was 2 years in the making, and it was the biggest investment of an item we've ever made because we knew how quickly it was going to sell. And even then, we can barely keep it in stock. And so so expressive, and there was so much work on restraint of adding the secondary barrel while not having it be over oaked. But just the like spectrum of flavor while still being a bourbon is so wide on it. It's really exciting. And Dovetail, there's the classic Dovetail and there's the gray label Dovetail, which I believe reached Australia.
Yep.
We have the gold label Dovetail that's coming out soon as well, and that's up to 25-year-old whiskeys that have the same Dovetail finishes on them, and it's 141 proof, which unfortunately means it's going to be aggressively expensive by the time it gets to Australia because the export and import and state tax is all on alcohol by volume. But
it makes me very, very sad.
What's frustrating is the price of all the gold labels from us is the same, but they vary based on proof when they get out of the United States. But I know that Australia does not get very many high proof whiskeys for that reason, and definitely doesn't get very many 141 proof 25-year-old blends. And so I'm really excited for the whatever it is, 9 or 12 or 15 bottles that end up in Australia seeing. I usually find out where they go when there's that few.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely brilliant, mate. Really exciting stuff. Look, well, I can't thank you enough for your time today, man. I've enjoyed hearing your story and some more insight into just the brilliant stuff that Barrell's doing out there. I know that our Bourbon Brother family are going to absolutely love having this in their November box. It's a great bottle, and I'm just excited to see what you guys are doing next. It's all innovative. It's all new, and I haven't had a bad drop yet from you guys, and that's all down to the process that you've clearly explained today, mate. So thank you so much for your time. We look forward to seeing more of Barrell in Australia, mate, and you're going to have to get out here at some point.
I really want to, and every time I talk to someone on one of these interviews, and I talk to Brock and John, I'm always so tempted to just do it. And it just hasn't worked out yet, especially with COVID in and out. Like there were a couple times where it looked like I might, and then Omicron or whatever happened. But it's going to happen eventually.
All right, man. Hey, look, thanks so much for your time, Will. Really, really appreciate it. I know people are going to just love hearing about this and getting the Barrell Z2D2 in their November box, mate. So thank you, and take care.
Thank you so much for having me.